My mother-in-law didn't even wait for the postpartum bleeding to stop before she threw my clothes into a trash bag. "No room for a useless wife who ruins our family name," she sneered, slamming the door on me and my 4-day-old newborn in the freezing rain. My husband stood right behind her, staring at his shoes like a coward. They thought they had successfully broken me, isolated me, and stripped me of my dignity. They thought I was an orphan with no one in my corner. What they completely forgot was who my mother is. They didn't know about the secret accounts, the hidden paperwork, or the fact that my mom is one of the most ruthless forensic accountants in the state. 4 days later, I returned. But I wasn't alone. My mom came with a senior legal partner, and we were about to turn their entire empire into ash. My name is Chloe. I am 29 years old, and until recently, I believed I was living a real-life fairy tale. When I married Julian, I thought I was entering a family built on prestige, tradition, and love. His family owned a prominent real estate empire in the Pacific Northwest, and his mother, Victoria, ruled over their social circle like royalty. I quickly learned that their affection was transactional, a golden cage where my only value was to look perfect and provide the next generation. But nothing could have prepared me for the day the cage shattered. 4 days ago, I was discharged from the hospital after a brutal 36-hour labor. I was exhausted, sore, and still dealing with intense postpartum bleeding. I held our newborn daughter, Lily, expecting the warm homecoming Julian had promised. Instead, the moment we walked through the front doors of the estate, Victoria was waiting in the foyer. Her face wasn't filled with grandmotherly joy. It was twisted in cold disgust. "A girl," she sneered, barely glancing at the car seat. "A useless, fragile girl. We needed an heir to secure the corporate restructuring, Julian." She failed. Before I could even process her words, Victoria grabbed a black trash bag from the closet and began throwing my clothes into it. I looked at Julian, crying, begging him to say something. But he just stood there, staring at his expensive leather shoes like a terrified little boy. He didn't lift a finger as his mother dragged me toward the door. "There is no room in this family for a useless wife who ruins our name," Victoria hissed, shoving the bag into my arms and pushing me out into the freezing, pouring rain. The heavy oak doors slammed shut, locking me out in the dark with a 4-day-old infant. It was a betrayal so sharp it physically hurt. If you've ever watched someone you love completely change their face and show you their true, ugly colors overnight, please comment down below and tell me how you survived it. The freezing rain soaked through my thin cardigan within seconds as I stumbled down the driveway, my body aching from childbirth and my arms trembling as I shielded Lily from the downpour. I had no car keys, no wallet, just the clothes on my back and a trash bag filled with mismatched clothes. I walked for what felt like miles until the neon glow of a 24-hour diner appeared through the fog. I collapsed into a corner booth at 3 a.m., the cheap vinyl seats sticking to my damp clothes. A kind-hearted waitress took one look at my pale face and the tiny bundle in my arms, immediately bringing over a warm blanket and a cup of hot water. As I rocked Lily, trying to stop my hands from shaking, the sheer weight of my isolation crushed me. I was completely broken. Julian's family had spent years making me feel small, convincing me that without them, I was nothing. With a trembling finger, I dialed the one number I hadn't called in years. My mother, Eleanor. We had been estranged because she was an intensely driven, cold corporate forensic accountant who always prioritized her career over sentimentality. I braced myself for her judgment, expecting her to tell me that I had made my bed and now I had to sleep in it. The phone rang 3 times before her sharp, alert voice cut through the static. "Chloe? It's 3 in the morning. What's wrong?" Breaking down into heavy, ragged sobs, I poured out the entire horror story, the 36-hour labor, Victoria's cruel words, the trash bag, and Julian's cowardly silence. There was a long, terrifying pause on the line. But when Eleanor spoke again, the distance was entirely gone. Her voice was pure, lethal ice. "Stay right there, Chloe. Do not look back at that house. I am coming to get you, and they're going to regret the day they were born." Exactly 45 minutes later, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the diner's foggy windows. My mother, Eleanor, marched inside. She didn't offer a dramatic, tearful embrace. Instead, she wrapped a heavy wool coat around my shoulders, gently took Lily's car seat, and guided me out to the car. The silence during the drive to her apartment wasn't cold. It was the quiet calculation of a predator tracking its prey. The moment we walked through her door, Eleanor set up a temporary nursery in her guest room with precision, and then she opened her laptop on the dining table. I sat there shivering, drinking hot tea, expecting her to console me. Instead, she looked up with a grim, knowing smile. Chloe, Victoria, and Julian think you are a helpless orphan they can discard. What they completely forgot is who I am and what your late father left behind. She turned the screen toward me, revealing complex financial spreadsheets and corporate registries. Eleanor explained that a decade ago, when Julian's family business was on the verge of absolute collapse, my late father had intervened. He had established a private, high-yield corporate trust. To save their empire, Victoria had signed a massive, hidden loan agreement funded entirely by that trust. For the past 5 years, Eleanor whispered, her fingers flying across the keyboard, I've been quietly monitoring their corporate filings as the trust's executor. Victoria and Julian haven't just been mismanaging the business. They've been actively skimming money from the trust funds to pay for their luxury cars and that massive estate. They thought no one was watching. I stared at the millions of dollars blinking on the screen. The very people who had just thrown me onto the street for being useless were actually surviving on my family's money. They had built their entire arrogant empire on a lie, and my mother had just unlocked the vault to their destruction. The next morning, the heavy atmosphere in my mother's apartment shifted from quiet calculation to active warfare. At exactly 8 a.m., the doorbell rang, and a man stepped inside who looked like he had been engineered in a lab specifically to terrify corporate executives. This was Arthur Pendleton, a senior legal partner and one of the most ruthless, high-profile family and corporate lawyers in the region. He carried a leather briefcase that looked more like a weapon than an office accessory, and he didn't waste a single second on pleasantries. Chloe, Arthur said, his voice deep and completely devoid of emotion as he sat across from me. What they did to you is not just a moral failing, it is a massive legal liability. We are going to dismantle them systematically. For the next 3 hours, my mother and Arthur mapped out the execution plan with terrifying precision. Because Victoria had physically and illegally evicted a postpartum mother from a primary residence without formal notice, she had committed a severe criminal offense. But that was just the bait. The real trap lay in the corporate trust documents my father had created. Arthur pointed to a specific, ironclad clause in the original loan agreement. The moment Julian's family violated standard corporate governance by skimming funds for personal luxury items, they defaulted on the trust. Furthermore, the contract states that any act of severe domestic misconduct or illegal eviction by the signees triggers an immediate acceleration clause. My mother leaned forward, her eyes sharp. This means, Chloe, that you hold the sole power as the beneficiary to call in the immediate, total repayment of the $2.5 million debt. They don't have that kind of liquidity. If we demand that money today, their entire real estate empire freezes, and we foreclose on the estate by the end of the week. The pieces were perfectly set. The trap was locked, and we were ready to spring it. For days after being pushed into the freezing rain, I walked back through the heavy oak doors of the Whitaker estate. But I wasn't the broken girl they discarded. Behind me walked Eleanor, holding Lily's car seat, and Arthur Pendleton, whose sharp tailored suit radiated impending doom. We marched directly into the formal dining room, where Victoria and Julian were enjoying a lavish lunch. Victoria looked up, her expression instantly twisting into a sneer. How dare you barge back into my home, Chloe? I thought I made it clear that we have no room for a useless. Be quiet, Victoria, Arthur interrupted, his booming voice cutting through the room like a physical blow. He didn't wait for permission. He slammed his leather briefcase onto the mahogany table, popped the latches, and began laying out the forensic audit files. Julian stood up, his face flushing with weak anger. Chloe, what is the meaning of this?
Who are these people?
This is my mother, I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been in my entire life. And this is our legal counsel. and we are here to discuss your eviction notice." Victoria laughed, a high-pitched, manic sound. "Eviction? I own this house, you pathetic girl. You have absolutely nothing." "Actually, you don't," Arthur said smoothly, sliding a bright red document across the table. "This is an immediate foreclosure notice. And these files contain documented proof of grand larceny, wire fraud, and systematic embezzlement from the corporate trust fund Chloe's father established a decade ago. You have been skimming millions to fund this lifestyle." Julian leaned over the table, his eyes scanning the forensic audit. I watched the exact second the reality sank in. The arrogance completely drained from his face, leaving him deathly pale. Victoria reached for the papers, her hands shaking violently as she read the legal acceleration clause. "You illegally evicted a postpartum mother, which instantly triggered the default terms of the loan," Arthur continued, leaning forward. "We are calling in the immediate repayment of the $2.5 million debt. You have 48 hours to pay in full, or the bank seizes this house, freezes your corporate assets, and we hand these files over to the federal prosecutor." The silence in the dining room was heavy, broken only by the sound of Victoria's ragged breathing. Julian collapsed back into his chair, looking less like a powerful executive and more like a ruined child. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and watery, attempting to use the one weapon he thought he had left. "Chloe, please," he stammered, his voice cracking with synthetic desperation. "Think about our family. Think about Lily. You wouldn't want her daughter's father to lose everything, would you? We can fix this. I'll make my mother apologize." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound sense of detachment. "You didn't think about Lily when you watched your mother throw her out into a storm, Julian. You chose your shoes over your own daughter." Arthur slid the final restructuring documents forward. "Sign here, relinquishing your corporate voting rights and transferring the primary estate to Chloe's trust to offset the debt, or we call the authorities right now." With trembling hands, Julian signed. Victoria stared blankly ahead, completely shattered. Within 48 hours, the locks were changed. The proud Whitaker empire was systematically dismantled. Because of their massive fraud liabilities, the business was liquidated to pay off remaining creditors, leaving them entirely exposed. Victoria was forced to downsize from her sprawling estate to a cramped, one-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, stripped of her elite social standing and expensive jewelry. Julian was left ruined, facing a mountain of corporate debt, a shattered reputation, and a permanent legal record that ensured he would never work in high-level real estate again. They had tried to make me homeless, but in their blind greed and cruelty, they had written the script for their own absolute financial and social ruin. 3 months later, I sat on the porch of a beautiful, sunlit home overlooking the water, holding Lily as she drifted off to sleep. The freezing rain of that horrific night felt like a lifetime away. With the liquidation of the Whitaker assets, I secured absolute financial independence and a peaceful future for my daughter. I am no longer the quiet, timid girl who allowed cruel people to dictate her worth. My mother's strength taught me how to stand tall, and Arthur's precision showed me that justice always finds a way. Now, I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were pushed out onto the street in my position? Would you have looked for revenge, or just walked away? Comment your thoughts below. I'm leaving 2 other unbelievable stories on the screen right now that you absolutely cannot miss. Thank you for watching.